this module, we move from learning how the different pieces of Scratch work together to create programs and on to bigger ideas. So we're going to focus on what we call the tools of programming. These are universal ideas that no matter what programming language you'll find. So in this lesson, we'll be working on simple if statements. In our programs, if statements act like a gate. It lets us kind of contain a couple commands off to the side that will only happen under certain circumstances. So we'll learn how to actually do those if statements in Scratch. But one of the things you find if you look at any other programming language is they all have a structure similar to this, where you can sort of block off certain commands from happening. So when we think about the if statements, ifs are about blocking commands. We think about it like being a gate. And we'll look at what this actually looks like in Scratch in just a second. We do this basically to ask true or false questions. Again, just like everything else we've seen, programming is very, very exact. So we have things called conditions, and the condition is what we use to ask a question. So if a number is bigger than 50, as an example, if the user entered hello, whatever the condition that we're asking, if that condition is true, then we open up the gate and we let the commands inside the if statement happen. If the condition is false, then those commands stay inside that little gated area and they're not activated. We do this because we need to start controlling the flow of commands. When we talk about flow of control in a program, that has to do with the order and the frequency that commands happen in. And so part of learning this toolkit of programming, these universal tools that are used, is basically about learning to control the order and sequence that those commands happen in. Let's go ahead and look at Scratch and see how this actually works. Okay, so here we've got a very simple starter program. And let's look at our code real quick. When the flag is clicked, I've got a count variable. It's going to reset count to 0. It's going to show count, so every time count changes, we'll be able to see it on the screen. We reset the ball to the position 0, 0, so right in the middle of our Cartesian coordinate grid. And then we have this loop that's just repeating. We're going to change count by 1, and then we're going to move the ball. So let's go ahead and run. Okay, nothing too dramatic. The ball moves to the side of the screen. You'll notice my loop is still running. The count here is changing, but the ball is basically stuck at the side of the screen. What we want to do is basically change the program so that the ball moves back and forth. So, most of the commands that we're learning this unit are here under the control section. Okay, here we go. So I'm on the sprite and I'm under control. This is where the forever loop that we've already been using is, but you see we have all of these other things. And again, we're talking about that flow of control, changing how our program actually runs. So the first tool here that we'll use is this if command. Just like the forever loop, it's shaped like a C. So you'll notice it's got a little thing up top that we'll need to fill in, and then inside are where those commands go. And those are those commands that we're going to gate. So let's think about when we have the ball hit the edge of the screen, we want it basically to turn around and we want to have it go the opposite direction. So that's under motion, and we're going to turn the ball around and we'll change that. Oops. Let's change it. We'll turn it around 180 degrees. Okay. So now you'll notice right here this little piece is blank. That's what we call the condition. That's the question that we're asking. So those are back here under operators. And you'll see right here you've got a couple. They're sort of diamond-y shaped. And basically what I'm going to do is say if my count variable gets to be over, let's say 40, then I want the ball to turn around. So we're going to grab this. I keep accidentally right-clicking on stuff. All right, so we're just going to plop that condition in. And this is a greater than symbol. So if my variable gets to be greater than, I think we said 40, then we'll turn around. Now to grab the variable, again, that's back here under data, and that's our count variable that we created. So if count is greater than 40, then turn it around, and I'm ready to plop this inside. So if we look at the flow of how our program's now going, okay, we have sort of the setup stuff. We initialize count to 0, we show the variable, and we reset where the ball is. Then we start into this loop that just keeps happening over and over and over again. every time the loop is now doing three things. It always is going to change the count by 1. It's always going to attempt to move the ball by 10 steps. And it's always going to ask this question. If the count is greater than 40, then it'll turn around. So let's go ahead and run it and see what we got. Okay, so we've got something a little bit different. It's clearly trying to turn around, but we've got a little bit of a problem here. Now you'll notice count is still climbing. That's one of the advantages of showing that variable, is you can really unpack and see what's happening. So now we're into 490s, 500s. All of those values are greater than 40. So basically what I've done by accident here is I've created a situation where count is always greater than 40, so it's always opening the gate and trying to turn around 180 degrees. So basically we've got this bouncing action where the ball is turning around over and over and over again really fast. So let me stop this. So the other thing we want to do is basically, you can see here we ended up in the thousands. We want to reset count so that it's always going exactly 40 steps. So what we'll do is we're going to change this right here, and we're going to put it, notice I'm putting it inside the if statement. So I'm going to set my variable count to 0. So once I've turned around, I'll set count to 0. Let's run and see if that works. Okay, there we go. So now the ball is moving back and forth, and every time count hits 40, you'll see here we get to 40 and it starts over again. It starts back at 0 and it's turning around. So there are all kinds of things that we can do with if statements. If you think about creating a game where every time you click the sprite, the score would go up. This basic technique of locking certain commands behind a gate and only triggering certain actions under certain circumstances really is pretty powerful. In terms of teaching students coding, we really want to think about, again, not just how do you create an if statement, but really talking to them about when do you use an if statement. We use that if statement anytime the problem setup is asking some kind of question. Usually they want to think about using an if statement. And that's actually an exercise that's pretty healthy for them, is you give them a couple problems. You don't have them write the code, but just sort of say, okay, which parts of our toolkit would we use to solve this problem? We've even seen teachers actually create graphics on paper of the different control structures and let them pick out of the pile which ones they would use. So if you're doing something like, when a number gets to be greater than some other value, or if the user types in X statement, things like that. Anytime you're asking that kind of question, that's typically when you want to use an if statement.